Hello. Today I'm going to talk about Romans 12:20. That is a verse where St. Paul elaborates on the teachings of Jesus in regards to treating our enemies. And it says specifically, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For by doing so, you will heap burning coals upon his head. And that's echoing Proverbs 25, verses 21 through 22. There's a lot of confusion about this verse. There's really, I guess, about three good ways to interpret it, and I'll give the one that I think is the best at the end. But the confusion is that the alternate ways of interpreting it are pretty good, and they've got some truthfulness to them, even though I don't think that they're getting at what the verse is about. And okay, so probably the most common way of interpreting this verse is kind of in what I would call the social psychology approach, where you really believe it's relating to shame, and it has to do with these certain rules of psychology that are kind of ingrained in us, like the law of reciprocity and cognitive dissonance theory. So we usually think of it a person that's a jerk, and they fall on hard times, and they have to ask a favor of someone, and they're going to experience guilt because they realize this person is treating them so much better than the way they've treated this person, and and they feel basically shame from that. The coals of fire are basically metaphorical shame, and I think that that's like probably 80% of people will interpret that. And there's a lot of truth to that, but it's not really what St. Paul is doing. But it's one of these things where even though you missed the target, it still has a lot of validity to it. So you at least get a lot. You get maybe 7 points out of 10 or something like that on that. But it isn't true in that. See, there would be a temptation to do this purely kind of like a passive aggressiveness to kind of guilt somebody, right? And St. Paul says that love has to be sincere, and the word for sincere relates to, I think it's related to the hypocrite word, where you're putting on a mask. So if you're doing that, just if there's any motivation to do it just to sort of guilt trip a person, ah ha ha, this person is going to feel bad when he realizes that, how much better I'm treating him than what he treated me, kind of thing. That doesn't quite fly, but that is how probably the bulk of Christianity interprets it. Now the next one, it's more rare, and it relates to Middle Eastern culture, and specifically, people would carry things. They would, like baskets. Instead of having a backpack, you would put like a big basket on your head and balance it. And also in the Middle East, especially that time before matches, people would, if they needed to do a fire, chances are you would go to your neighbor to get some coals, some live coals that you could put on some straw and wood and heat it up. So the second approach to this is to kind of see it as relating to that it's sort of reinforcing that you should give people what they need, and part of that is fire, besides the food and drink, and you're kind of like you're giving them what they need. It's sort of that verse from Proverbs about the person that saves souls is wise. You're taking care of their life because they are a child of God, and because you're doing that and you're looking after God's creation, God will reward you because that's the end of the verse, that God will reward you. And you know it's kind of true on the culture, but that's not quite what it's really getting at. But you know, again, it's like partial credit. You know that you are talking about some true things. Okay, the last one, it's really about repentance. And um, I guess to start with, there is this Egyptian ritual of actually literally putting burning coals on a person's head to show remorse. And like people might nitpick that idea that something might be coming from Egyptian culture, but I can point to a number of things of Hebrew culture that come from Egypt that they picked up, just like there's a lot of stuff of the Hebrew culture that came from Mesopotamia because Abraham came there. I mean, things like the idea that fire is appearing in the Pentateuch, and that's like a symbol of God's presence. That's very Mesopotamian. Things like the stoning ritual, the wisdom literature. There's a number of things like that that are actually Egyptian that the Israelites borrowed. So anyway, it seems to be relating to repentance. And besides that Egyptian ritual, there are incidents in the Old Testament where that would be true if you start to look at the context, especially things like the altar fire and things like that, where Isaiah's commissioning in Isaiah 6 is a perfect example of this, where Isaiah has this revelation of God right after King Uzziah dies, and he sees this vision of heaven. And at some point, oh, I know, he hears a call of who's going to carry God's message. And no, I think I'm getting that ahead of time. He realizes he has unclean lips at some point, and a seraphim angel brings the coal from the altar, the heavenly altar, and puts it to his lips to purify him. And there's other associations, but something coming from the altar, the idea of purifying, that pops up at different times. And I also read some commentaries. Apparently, some of the Eastern Orthodox picked this up. Somehow the Septuagint is more clear on this issue. So anyway, the coals of fire, it's more like you're going to be bringing that person to repentance by being kind to them, and God is going to reward you for that. That is really the true meaning of the verse. And I will talk to you later. I hope you enjoyed this. Please like it and share it. And I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.